December 22, 1987, and the small town of Burlington, Vermont was buzzing with excitement as students began their 2-week winter break, eager to enjoy the holidays and the snow that had already accumulated to create perfect winter conditions. Lake Champlain bordered the eastern edge of Burlington, and during winter the shoreline trails became popular destinations for families who enjoyed walking along the frozen landscape and watching ice formations develop on the lake's edge. Ethan Parker was 9 years old that Tuesday afternoon, a quiet boy with straight blonde hair that fell into his eyes, hazel eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a thoughtful demeanor that made teachers describe him as mature beyond his years. He wore a tan canvas barn coat with corduroy collar, forest green cargo pants, brown leather hiking boots that laced up to mid-calf, a yellow wool scarf his aunt had knitted, and he carried a disposable camera to photograph winter scenes for a school project. Ethan had spent the morning at home with his mother, Helen Parker, a nurse who had the day off from the hospital, and at 1:30 p.m. she'd agreed to drive him to the Lake Champlain shoreline trail so he could take photos. Helen parked at the trailhead parking area near Oakledge Park, a popular access point with picnic facilities and restrooms that drew visitors year-round, and she planned to walk the trail with Ethan while he photographed. "Stay on the main trail. Don't go down to the ice and we'll walk together for an hour," Helen instructed at 1:45 p.m., and Ethan nodded while adjusting the camera strap around his neck. The shoreline trail was well maintained and clearly marked, running parallel to Lake Champlain for approximately 2 miles, with occasional benches and interpretive signs about local ecology and history. At 2:15 p.m., Ethan had photographed several winter scenes including ice formations and snow-covered trees, and they were approximately half a mile from the parking area when Helen realized she'd left her car keys in the ignition. "Ethan, I need to run back to the car to get my keys," Helen said. "You can keep walking slowly on the trail and taking photos, and I'll catch up to you in just a few minutes, okay?" Ethan agreed and continued walking along the trail at his usual careful pace, stopping to photograph interesting scenes while Helen jogged back toward the parking area approximately a quarter-mile behind. The trail had good visibility with minimal trees obstructing views for several hundred yards in either direction, and Helen could see Ethan's tan coat as she jogged away, confident he'd be safe on the popular trail. Helen reached her car at 2:18 p.m., retrieved her keys from the ignition where she'd left them, and immediately jogged back toward the trail to catch up with Ethan, the entire detour taking approximately 4 to 5 minutes. But when Helen returned to the trail and looked in the direction Ethan had been walking, she couldn't see his tan coat anywhere along the visible stretch of path ahead. Helen called Ethan's name and walked quickly along the trail, thinking he'd simply gotten further ahead than expected while she'd retrieved her keys, and she expected to see him around the next bend. But she walked for several minutes covering the area Ethan should have reached, and there was no sign of him anywhere on the trail, and his tan coat wasn't visible in either direction. By 2:25 p.m., Helen was running along the trail calling Ethan's name urgently, checking side paths that led to the shoreline and looking toward the frozen lake thinking he might have gone down to photograph ice despite her instructions. Other hikers on the trail helped Helen search, checking areas off the main path and calling Ethan's name, but nobody had seen a 9-year-old boy in a tan coat with a camera in the past 15 minutes. In approximately 4 to 5 minutes, while his mother retrieved car keys a quarter-mile away, 9-year-old Ethan Parker vanished from a popular lakeside trail in broad daylight without anyone seeing where he went. If you want to hear what happened in this baffling case that has never been solved, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and comment where you're watching from or what theories you have. Now let's continue. Helen contacted park rangers at 2:30 p.m. from a call box near the trail, and within minutes rangers were searching the shoreline area and surrounding woods looking for Ethan. Burlington police arrived at 2:45 p.m., and Officer Michael Santos immediately organized a systematic search of the trail and surrounding areas, concerned about a 9-year-old missing near a frozen lake in December. The disposable camera Ethan had been carrying was crucial evidence, and searchers looked for it, hoping it might have been dropped if Ethan had run or been grabbed, but no camera was found anywhere along the trail. The trail itself was examined for footprints or signs of struggle, but December foot traffic and packed snow made identifying specific tracks impossible, and there was no clear evidence of what had happened. By 3:30 p.m., over 50 people were searching Oakledge Park and the surrounding shoreline, calling Ethan's name, and checking every possible location a 9-year-old might have gone along the Lake Champlain Trail. Search and rescue teams arrived from across Vermont with bloodhounds, and the dogs were given Ethan's scent from clothing in Helen's car, and they began tracking from the point where Helen had last seen him on the trail. The bloodhounds picked up Ethan's scent along the main trail, continuing in the direction he'd been walking. But approximately 200 yards from where Helen had left him, the scent trail became confused near a side path leading down to the lake. The handlers reported that the dogs seemed to indicate Ethan had left the main trail at that point, possibly descending toward the shoreline, but the scent became difficult to follow on the rocky slope and frozen ground. Search teams descended to the lake's edge near where the dogs had indicated, and they searched along the shoreline looking for any sign of Ethan or evidence that he'd been near the ice. The lake was frozen near the shore with ice extending approximately 50 to 75 feet from the bank, but the ice was unstable and dangerous with visible cracks and thin patches where water showed through. Searchers found no evidence that Ethan had gone onto the ice, no broken sections or disturbed snow that would indicate someone had fallen through, and this both relieved and confused investigators. Detective Robert Chen arrived at 4 p.m. and immediately focused on the timeline and the fact that Ethan had vanished in just 4 to 5 minutes from a trail where his mother could see him moments before. Chen interviewed Helen extensively about Ethan's personality and whether he would have left the trail to explore or photograph something near the lake, despite being told to stay on the main path. "Ethan is cautious and rule-following," Helen insisted through tears. "He wouldn't have gone down to the ice after I specifically told him not to, and he's terrified of deep water. He wouldn't go near it voluntarily." Other hikers who'd been on the trail between 2:00 and 2:30 p.m. were identified and interviewed, and several remembered seeing a woman jogging toward the parking area around 2:15, which matched Helen's timeline. But nobody recalled seeing a 9-year-old boy in a tan coat with a camera after approximately 2:15 p.m., suggesting Ethan had disappeared within minutes of Helen leaving him to retrieve her keys. One elderly couple mentioned seeing a dark-colored van parked at a trail access point about half a mile north of Oakledge Park around 2 p.m., but they hadn't paid close attention and couldn't provide details about the vehicle or driver. This information about a van became an important lead, and investigators began searching for anyone who'd been parked near trail access points that afternoon, though tracking vehicles without license plates proved difficult. FBI was contacted by evening given the potential for abduction, and Special Agent Catherine Wells arrived from the Boston field office with resources and experience from similar cases involving children disappearing from outdoor recreation areas. Agent Wells theorized that someone might have been watching the trail and had seen Helen leave Ethan alone, then had approached the boy quickly while he was unattended and vulnerable. The fact that Ethan had a camera made him a distinctive target, and someone might have used that as a conversation starter, asking to see his photos or offering to show him something worth photographing near the lake. A 9-year-old focused on taking pictures might have followed someone a short distance off the trail, thinking it was safe, or that his mother would catch up, and by the time he realized something was wrong, he could have been too far away for anyone to hear him call for help. By nightfall, the temperature was dropping toward 20 degrees, and hypothermia became a serious concern if Ethan was outside and unable to find shelter, though his barn coat and winter clothing provided some protection. Search efforts continued through the night with powerful spotlights illuminating the shoreline and surrounding woods, and helicopters with thermal imaging scanned the area looking for any heat signature. But the thermal scans revealed nothing that indicated a child's presence, and the tan coat Ethan wore didn't have reflective properties that would make him visible in darkness. By Wednesday morning, the search had expanded to cover a 5-mile radius from Oakledge Park, with teams checking abandoned buildings, boathouses, and storage facilities where someone might have taken a child. Lake Champlain itself was examined by dive teams in areas where the ice was thin enough to potentially swallow someone, but no evidence was found suggesting Ethan had gone through the ice. By late December, the intensive search had been scaled back after a week produced no trace of Ethan, despite thousands of volunteer hours and extensive professional investigation covering hundreds of square miles. The case generated intense media coverage across Vermont and neighboring states, with Ethan's photo appearing on television, showing him in his wire-rimmed glasses with his serious expression and blonde hair. The tan barn coat and yellow wool scarf became key identifying features, and descriptions were broadcast repeatedly hoping someone had seen Ethan after he'd disappeared from the trail. Tips flooded in from people claiming to have seen Ethan at various locations, but every reported sighting was investigated and found to be other blonde boys with similar features or mistaken observations. Detective Chen focused investigation on the dark van that had been reported near a trail access point. And while several vans matching that vague description were located and their owners interviewed, none raised suspicions. The theory that Ethan had been lured off the trail by someone promising to show him something worth photographing gained traction, especially given his interest in winter photography for his school project. Someone could have said there were interesting ice formations down by the shore, or rare birds, or anything that would appeal to a 9-year-old with a camera, Agent Wells explained, and Ethan might have followed thinking it was safe. But this theory struggled to explain how someone could have been in position to approach Ethan during the exact 4 to 5 minute window when Helen was gone, unless they'd been watching and waiting for an opportunity. The possibility that Ethan had simply wandered too close to the lake and had fallen through thin ice was revisited repeatedly, though extensive searches of the shoreline and underwater areas found no evidence supporting this scenario. Geologists and ice experts were consulted about whether someone could fall through ice and leave no trace, and they confirmed that while possible, there would typically be evidence at the breakthrough point that searchers hadn't found. By early 1988, the case had essentially gone cold with periodic reviews but no active investigation, and Ethan Parker became another child who'd vanished from an outdoor recreation area, despite being just minutes away from his parent. Helen quit her nursing job and devoted herself entirely to searching for Ethan, distributing flyers throughout Vermont and New York, and she appeared regularly on television, keeping the case in public consciousness. The disposable camera Ethan had been carrying became a symbol of the case, and Helen held on to the hope that if the camera was found, the photos might provide clues about what had happened or where Ethan had gone. The case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries in 1989, and the broadcast generated thousands of tips. But as with everything else, each lead was investigated and found to be mistaken identity or well-meaning but inaccurate information. One particularly compelling tip came from a woman in upstate New York who reported seeing a boy matching Ethan's description with a man at a rest stop on Interstate 87 in late December 1987, but investigation couldn't verify the sighting. By 1995, the case had become one of Vermont's most baffling unsolved disappearances, discussed in forums about missing children and studied by investigators trying to understand how someone could vanish so completely. Age progression photos were created showing what Ethan might look like at 15, 20, 25, and these images were distributed through missing persons databases as technology advanced. Helen never remarried and never had other children, unable to move forward from December 22, 1987, when she'd left Ethan alone for 4 minutes and had lost him forever. She walked the Lake Champlain shoreline trail almost daily for years, following the same path she and Ethan had taken, hoping to notice something that had been missed, or to find some evidence that would explain what happened. Other hikers on the trail would occasionally recognize Helen and offer condolences or share their own theories about what might have happened to Ethan, and she listened to every suggestion no matter how unlikely. Detective James Morrison took over the cold case in 2005, and he was troubled by how little physical evidence existed and how completely Ethan had vanished from a popular trail in broad daylight. Morrison investigated whether there had been other disappearances from outdoor recreation areas in Vermont during the 1980s, looking for patterns that might suggest a predator who targeted such locations. He found several cases of hikers and outdoor enthusiasts who'd gone missing in Vermont wilderness areas, but none of the cases showed clear connections or patterns suggesting a single perpetrator. By 2010, Ethan would have been 32 years old, and Helen held memorial services each December 22nd at Oakledge Park, standing near the trail where she'd last seen her son. True crime podcasts discovered Ethan's case in the 2010s, and several shows featured detailed episodes about the shoreline trail disappearance and the 4-minute window when a mother's brief absence had led to permanent loss. The years accumulated with agonizing slowness for Helen Parker, with 1987 becoming 2000 and then 2010, and Ethan's bedroom remained exactly as it had been, filled with books about nature and photography equipment for a child who'd loved documenting the world. Detective Sarah Chen took over the cold case in 2015, and she brought modern investigative techniques to evidence that had baffled investigators for nearly 3 decades. Chen used advanced mapping software to analyze the Lake Champlain shoreline trail and identify locations where someone could have quickly taken Ethan without being seen by other hikers. She discovered that the area where the bloodhounds had lost Ethan's scent corresponded to a section of trail with dense vegetation on one side and the lake on the other, creating natural cover for someone waiting. Chen theorized that a perpetrator might have been positioned in the vegetation near that side path, watching the trail and waiting for a vulnerable target. And when Ethan had passed alone, they'd acted quickly. 4 minutes is actually a significant window of opportunity for someone who's prepared and watching, Chen explained. They could approach, convince, or grab Ethan and move him to a waiting vehicle without anyone on the trail noticing. The side path where the bloodhounds had indicated Ethan left the main trail led down to a small access road used by park maintenance, and in 1987 this road wasn't gated or monitored. Someone with knowledge of park layout could have parked a vehicle on that maintenance road, grabbed Ethan from the trail, and driven away within minutes, explaining why searchers found no trace of him. Chen tracked down and re-interviewed everyone who'd been living near Oakledge Park in 1987, asking if they remembered seeing vehicles or suspicious activity around the time of Ethan's disappearance. One former park maintenance worker recalled that the gate on the access road had been left unlocked that week due to ongoing work, making it accessible to anyone who knew about it. This detail had never been emphasized in original investigation reports, and it supported the theory that someone familiar with the park had used the access road as part of an abduction plan. By 2020, Ethan would have been 42 years old, and age progression photos showed a blond man with wire-rimmed glasses who might have resembled his father, though Helen feared he died in 1987. Chen investigated whether any similar cases of children disappearing from trails or outdoor recreation areas had occurred in Vermont or neighboring states during the 1980s and 1990s. She identified 3 other cases with similarities: children who'd vanished while briefly separated from parents on hiking trails or in parks, though attempts to connect them to a single perpetrator found no concrete evidence. Modern technology, including drones and ground-penetrating radar, was used to search areas around Oakledge Park that had been difficult to access in 1987, looking for any evidence that might have been missed. But decades of development and environmental changes had transformed the landscape, and locating evidence from 1987 after more than 30 years proved nearly impossible. Helen participated in annual memorial walks organized by missing persons advocacy groups, and she would share Ethan's story with other families searching for lost loved ones, offering support born from decades of grief. The tan barn coat Ethan had worn became an iconic element of the case, and occasionally people reported finding similar coats at thrift stores or in storage units, generating brief hope before investigation eliminated connections. True crime communities online debated Ethan's case, with some convinced he'd been abducted by someone who knew the park layout and had planned carefully, while others believed he'd wandered onto unsafe ice despite being told not to. The case appeared in books about New England mysteries and unsolved disappearances, always featuring the detail of a mother's 4-minute absence and a child who'd vanished from a popular trail. Chen obtained and analyzed traffic camera footage from 1987, if any existed near routes leading from Oakledge Park, hoping to identify vehicles leaving the area around the time Ethan disappeared. But traffic cameras were limited in 1987, and the few that existed had long since recorded over footage from that December day, eliminating a potential source of evidence. Helen died in 2023 at age 76 from heart failure, having spent 36 years searching for Ethan and never knowing what had happened to her son on that December afternoon. Her obituary mentioned that she was survived by her missing son Ethan, whose disappearance had defined her life and remained one of Vermont's most baffling unsolved cases. Before her death, Helen donated Ethan's belongings and case files to Vermont Historical Society, ensuring his story would be preserved and that future investigators might access information that could eventually solve the mystery. By 2025, 38 years after Ethan Parker vanished from the Lake Champlain Shoreline Trail, his case remained completely unsolved with no credible leads or explanations that satisfied the limited physical evidence. Detective Chen continued to review the case periodically, and she maintained that somewhere in Burlington or beyond, someone knew what had happened to Ethan during those 4 minutes when Helen had retrieved her car keys. Cases like this don't solve themselves, Chen stated in a 2024 interview, but they can be solved if the right person comes forward, or if we find evidence that's been hidden or overlooked for decades. The Lake Champlain Shoreline Trail where Ethan disappeared remained a popular destination for hikers and nature enthusiasts. though longtime residents would sometimes mention the case when walking past Oakledge Park. Burlington installed a small memorial bench near the trailhead with a plaque reading, "In memory of Ethan Parker, lost December 22, 1987, may his story keep other children safe, transforming the location into a reminder of vigilance." The case stood as a cautionary tale about how quickly children can vanish even in seemingly safe environments, and how brief moments of parental absence can be exploited by those with harmful intentions. And it highlighted the unique torture faced by families when loved ones disappear without explanation, leaving questions that persist for decades with no answers and no closure. True crime researchers continued to study Ethan's case as an example of a perfect disappearance, where minimal time and opportunity resulted in a child vanishing completely without witnesses or physical evidence. Some theorized that Ethan had been taken by someone who'd been watching the trail specifically for vulnerable children, someone with knowledge of park layout and escape routes that allowed quick removal of victims. Others believed it was opportunistic rather than planned, that someone had happened to be in the area and had seized an unexpected chance when they'd seen Ethan alone on the trail. The disposable camera Ethan had been carrying was never found, and investigators speculated it might have contained photos that would have provided clues, or that the perpetrator had taken it to eliminate potential evidence. Decades of technological advancement, including DNA databases and genealogical research, had solved many cold cases from the 1980s, but these tools required biological evidence or living persons to test, neither of which existed in Ethan's case. The case proved that even with modern investigative techniques, some disappearances from 38 years ago remain unsolvable without new information coming forward from witnesses or perpetrators. Chen believed that if Ethan had been abducted, the person responsible might eventually make a deathbed confession or reveal information that could lead to recovery of remains and answers for the family. People carry guilt, Chen explained, and sometimes as they age or face mortality, they feel compelled to confess, and that's when cold cases can suddenly break open after decades of silence. Missing persons advocacy groups used Ethan's case in training materials about child safety during outdoor activities, emphasizing that predators can strike in seconds and that constant supervision is crucial. The yellow wool scarf Ethan had worn, knitted by his aunt, became a symbol remembered by those who'd known the family, and his aunt had kept the matching scarf she'd made for herself, unable to wear it after Ethan disappeared. Oakledge Park underwent renovations in 2020, including installation of surveillance cameras along trails and better lighting for evening use. Security improvements that came 33 years too late for Ethan, but might protect future children. The case remained open in Burlington police files, and new detectives who inherited cold cases were instructed to review Ethan's disappearance and remain alert for any information that might emerge. Some longtime investigators believed Ethan's remains were somewhere in the Lake Champlain area, possibly buried in locations that were accessible in 1987, but have since been developed or altered beyond recognition. Others thought he'd been taken far from Vermont, possibly out of state or even out of the country, making recovery impossible without someone directly involved coming forward with information. The 4-minute window when Helen had been gone became the defining element of the case, a brief absence that had catastrophic consequences and that haunted everyone who studied the disappearance. Parents who learned about Ethan's case often changed their own behavior, becoming more cautious about leaving children unattended even briefly in places that seemed safe, recognizing how quickly tragedy could strike. The case appeared regularly in lists of most mysterious unsolved disappearances and cases that haunt investigators, always featuring the detail of a winter school break that had turned into a search that never ended. As of 2025, anyone with information about Ethan Parker's disappearance is urged to contact Burlington Police or Vermont State Police, as even small details from 38 years ago could potentially break the case. Detective Chen holds hope that advances in technology or someone's conscience will eventually provide answers, though she acknowledges that some cases remain mysteries despite decades of effort. Ethan deserves to be found, Chen says, and his mother deserved to know what happened even though she died without answers, and I believe someone out there knows the truth and could still come forward. The story of Ethan Parker reminds us that 9-year-olds should be safe on hiking trails with parents nearby, that 4 minutes is enough time for life to change forever, and that some families search for answers that may never come. And on the Lake Champlain shoreline trail where a boy in a tan coat once photographed winter scenes before vanishing, His memory endures as a reminder that some mysteries resist solution despite decades of investigation. The case proves that even popular outdoor areas in daylight hours can be dangerous, that predators can act with stunning speed when opportunities arise, and that families deserve truth even when it seems impossible to find. Burlington residents who remember 1987 occasionally walk the shoreline trail and think about Ethan, wondering what happened during those 4 minutes and whether the truth will ever emerge from wherever it's been hidden. Detective Chen continues to review the case files, and she's instructed future investigators to never close the case, to remain vigilant for new information, and to believe that even after 38 years, answers are still possible. The winter school break that never ended for Helen Parker doesn't have to remain a mystery forever. Chen states, "Someone knows what happened to Ethan, and until that person speaks, we keep searching."